All right, thanks for coming, everyone. Especially on such a cold night. I know how cold it was. I woke up this morning and I stayed in like that extra 10 minutes that you really need to get out of bed. Anyway, thanks for Kogan for hosting this event. We really like this community. If you want to be a part and work with us on some pretty cool tech, shout out to one of our staff lined up against the wall here, or just send me a message on meetup.com and I can point you in the right direction. Also tonight we've got a discount from an upcoming conference. It's Components Conf. It's a web and tech and app conference, full stack. They're offering a 20% discount off their tickets up until the end of June. You can find these pamphlets around the room and that'll give you 20% off with the discount code ReactMelb, React-Melb, all lowercase. Sounds really cool, and one of tonight's speakers is going to be in the conference, so if you like what he's going to bring to the table, you might be interested in the other speakers as well. So, the breakdown, I'm going to have one talk, and then we'll have a food break, and then we're going to have two more deep dive talks, and then announcements. So you can talk about a project you're working on, or if you're hiring, that kind of stuff. So first up, we're going to have Anthony Mittaz from Homepass. He's going to talk a little bit about integrating ReasonReact and ReasonML into an existing codebase. And then after that, we're going to have Mark. Mark's a design systems engineering lead at Seek. He's also the organizer, or one of the organizers of MelbJS, and a co-creator of CSS modules. He's going to talk about designing with React and the bigger picture. And then that's going to be followed up by Baz, also known as the TypeScript guy. And he's a design systems principal lead at Australia Post. Did I get that right? Yeah, that's fine. Yes, close. Okay. And he's going to talk about using Cypress to make better documentation with your code. Anyway, without further ado, let's introduce Anthony.
Can you see at the back? Should I go bigger? A little bit. Okay, I'm gonna start. So good evening. I'm here tonight to talk about how to slowly integrate Reason or ReasonML into your React code base. But before we start, I just want to say thank you to the organizer tonight to have a really good speaker lineup, and everything's really good. As well, my name is Anthony Mittaz, as I was already introduced. You can find me on Twitter as NSFounder, sync at GitHub. So I know especially pressure on since we have the Mr. TypeScript here. I'm not here to convince you to use Reason. I just want to inspire you. There is this forever war about what's the best type language out there. There's no war. To me, doesn't matter. Everything's good. And so last year, there was a talk from KR here that introduced ReasonML. So for the people that were not present, ReasonML is a relatively new programming language from Facebook and creator of React. So what you have to know is like React originally was created using a ML language, and it got converted to JavaScript later on because you'll get a lot more. Oh, what's happening with the slides? Something's happening. Oh. Don't know what's happening, sorry. Keep dropping. Computer is nervous. Definitely not me. Every time I'm here, there's a technical problem. Should I plug another one? Just make a joke. Okay, so all you have to know is ReasonML is a really, really nice language. It's on top of OCaml. OCaml is 20 years old, so it's building on top of solid foundation. For example, 20 years old is what same age as what Ruby is, and TerMojo is fast compile time. I won't touch anything. Okay, so, but before we start to talk about how we integrate Reason into your React app, I just want to tell you why, because there's a couple of reasons that resonate with me. It might not resonate with you, but it does definitely resonate with me. So Reason is called ReasonML. To reason, oh my God. I cannot use Reason. Reason is called ReasonML. Is that was such a good reason to say this. It's because Reason is really hard to Google. If you will just Google Reason, you won't hear about the programming language. You'll just hear about some random stuff. So they decided to call it Reason. And the second reason is ML stands for meta languages, and it has all sort of fancy stuff and non-fancy stuff as well. Like I'm about to drop a buzzword, like here, polymorphic type. I have no idea what it means. I'm just joking. I don't know. And as well, what I really like from Reason, I'm a lazy person. I don't like to write code. All the code I don't have to write, and I don't like to write typing annotations. The first 500 files is fine. No, I never wrote 500 files, but the first time you write some types, it sounds fun and you feel really smart, but then you realize this is just more and more boilerplate. So if you don't have to write type, and with a meta language, you get to auto-assign typing annotation without having to annotate your types. So we're going to start straight with a demo. Okay, so the demo, so switch computer. Whoa, it works. Can you see at the back? I won't change it if you can't. Okay, so that's the TypeScript, small, tiny TypeScript annotations. Again, there's a bunch of things that you can improve from. This is just a default template from Code Sandbox. If you don't know, Code Sandbox is a fantastic online code editor that's powered by Visual Studio Code as well, or what's underneath. And so we have a small type component here. So you can see it has my value. And so again, my TS configurations for the people that are familiar with TypeScript is very light. It's what comes by default on Code Sandbox. And if you can see here, when I have this component, I use it as my value test, so I'm passing a string. So, and when I looked at what type is inferred from this, it just say I'm anything. I don't care what you are. I will take anything. And so for the people beginning with this, and if they, again you can go tweak your configurations, and you're like, oh, so I can pass anything. So now I can start writing dumb stuff. Okay, so I can do this. Oh my God, live demo, live coding. Yay. Okay, so you can do this, and the compiler is still happy. But what's going to happen is your code's going to horribly crash. But nothing told you what to do. Again, it's a very contrived example, but it's just for someone, a beginner, that really like to use any for anything, and then just get started and think, oh, the types will help me here, and then you can write anything, and things stop working. The way of fixing it, but that's not the point. But that's and again, TypeScript. We use TypeScript at work. We use Flow at work, and it's fantastic. Both are fantastic tools, but just they have some things to know. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the second one. So the second demo is gonna be Reason. So we have a tiny little app here. Can you see at the back? So it's exactly the same component. So we're gonna take. So we can look at first of all, there's no typing here, so we can look at what typing got deducted from just declaring my value. So if you if you go over my value, you can see that it's detecting that this is a React element. I'm gonna go into why it's a React element. In JavaScript and TypeScript, a React element can be all sort of things. It can be a string, a boolean, another element, etc. But for Reason, it's just this thing, and you're gonna see once I start using it. So if I go back to using this component, so I'm just gonna, I don't want this part. Okay, I'm gonna use the right one. Here, I take this here, I plug it into my code. If I remember how to write React, this one is before. Yeah. Okay, so I've got this stuff, and now I'm using it, and I'm expecting everything to work. It's like, why is it not working? Does anyone know? I'm not going to ask you. So if you over it, it's going to tell you, you're expecting me to give me React elements, but you're giving me a string, okay? And then it's like, oh, you're giving me a string and stuff. So that's the one thing you have to know, and that's a little bit annoying when you get started with Reason. You cannot pass random stuff into your as children. When you're using children, you're gonna have to do this stuff, this dance of that's a React.string, and you pass the value, okay? And once you do this, it's happy, and you can see the value. Now it's a string, and everyone's happy. And because you do this, so with the meta language, so now by usage, because here this function can only accept string. So from the usage, it's like that mile value can only be a string. It cannot be anything else. Okay, so if you try to pass anything else, it won't work. And that's what I mean by auto-deducting a type based on usage. So you don't have to declare. You can still go declare your types if you want, but the point is you don't have to. Okay, that's point number one. Okay, we're gonna go next. And so why can't children only be of a ReasonReact, a React element? Overall, the Reason community, BuckleScript, which we'll introduce later on, and OCaml. So let's just go back to BuckleScript. BuckleScript is what takes your Reason code that transform, so you cannot run Reason on the browser. You have to transform it to JavaScript. So is Scala.js, so is TypeScript, yeah, kind of. But a lot of language convert to JavaScript, and so once you use this tool called BuckleScript that takes your native, not your Reason code, turn it into JavaScript, and all it does, it's just write non-JS6 React. And if you can see, if you look at the generated code, there's no runtime associated to this. It's just called React code underneath, and it's super readable. I mean, as much as a computer can be readable. I don't know. And so that's what BuckleScript is. And so, and OCaml share a common goal, and the goal is to make things super, super fast. And so there was this tweet yesterday, or a couple of days ago, thanks to recent feature landed in Ninja build, we'll shave another 10 millisecond in incremental build feedback loop for BuckleScript and ReasonML project. 10 milliseconds is important. That's how we try to approach our 100 millisecond feedback loop. So that's the kind of level they are at. They're trying to have a compiler that takes no time. And so, for example, I'm lucky enough to be working on TypeScript and Flow bigger code base at work, so I can compare to what it is like to have bigger, I mean, they're not that big code base, but for example, for us, we have a big React app that has probably 100 screens, I don't know, that is using TypeScript. And so if we, again, that's a contrive example, it uses no emit, it doesn't use incremental compile because we use Babel, etc. But if you write some code, you ask to do a type checking, it will take us 62 seconds, okay? That's 160,000 lines of code. That's, I think it's still quite small for a code base. I mean, that's just a source, not the node module, etc. Or was I wrong? Perhaps it was 16,000. No, probably 160. And then we have a 3 to 4 years old node monolith using Flow that is fully typed, and it's 240,000 lines of code, so it's 800,000. And the Flow check again is like without running the server and stuff from scratch, from nothing, etc. It takes 40 seconds. So again, there's many things you can do. There is the TypeScript team recently introduced incremental compilation stuff. So there's things you can do to improve those speeds. But that's what we get right now. And this doesn't even include linting, prettying, which Reason does by default. So for example, the story of prettier, it was inspired by the person using reformat and doing some reason at Facebook, for example. So if you add all this prettying, formatting, all this stuff, which by default, BuckleScript and Reason will do for you, it'll always be faster. Again, right now I don't have a 200,000 lines stuff, but when I was at the conference, the Reason conference in Vienna last month, not 2 months, last month I think it was, or 2 months ago, people were talking about 20 million lines of codes and having no compile time at all. So that was pure OCaml, not BuckleScript, but that's what they're trying to achieve is like, for them, you have trade-off, and the trade-off has, for example, I'm not sure if it's too technical, but you of course you have some trade-off. So for example, the reason to React, the children have to be of the same type. It's just to speed up the compiler. Because if you have to go into having too many type options, it makes things slow. So they much rather trade this off for faster compile time. Okay, and I'm not sure about you, but do you like to write some code and wait? Because I really don't. And if you look at what's the trends when you work on a code base, that is smaller, over time a code base will grow in general, and so things will just get slower and slower. And again, so if you compile, again, Microsoft's doing Flow. I lost hope at one point, but I think they're back in business now. But and Microsoft's working really hard to make things faster, and they have a really, really smart engineer into it. But right now I have this other tool that is super fast and that I really like. And so now we're gonna have a little quiz. Who is using GraphQL at work or at home, anything? Okay, put your hands up if you're using Apollo. Okay, put your hands up if you're using a Relay for the client. Nobody? Seriously? It's amazing. Okay, Relay is much better. There's still no one? Nobody? Nobody? Okay, so when you use Apollo, do you use TypeScript or Flow? Do you type all your queries? Put your hands up if you do. There's 1 person, 2 person, 3 person. Do you think it's quite painful to do? No? You're super happy with it? Like generating code all the time, things breaking? Yeah? Bravo. Thank you. Give him a job. No, you already have one. Obviously, you're doing cool stuff. Okay, so now I'm here to show you. So at this conference, the Reason conference and the React Europe talk, every time someone talks about Reason, they come talk about GraphQL and how cool when using macro, called PPX. They're not really macro, but dynamic programming. How cool is it? I mean, not just cool, but how convenient is it to do GraphQL when you have other type that can be inferred on the fly? Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at this is short time again. So we have another demo. I really don't know what happened, but the person that's always talk, it's a person, I forgot her name. She always talk in behalf of Reason, and she just did a talk, and she introduced this Redux to GraphQL. That's where Apollo introduced hooks, React hooks, and the new library, even there were 3 other libraries that are doing the same things, but it's okay. And she put up this sample, so when you start, I was about to say Xcode, VS Code, and again, she did such a good job at tweaking the settings of this VS Code. I don't know what, I know where it comes from, but it's a really cool idea. I didn't know you could do this. But if you look at something, so it's still convenient. So again, here we're looking at TypeScript. There's no reason. And you can see you query at types. You can, if you add yet another extensions, you can deduct that this field isn't valid, etc. You can run this code gen here that's going to do all sort of things. That's going to generate types again. is going to have to generate types that should be unique for every query. So then you end up at having to take those types that are automatically generated using this Apollo code gen. You put it in there, you import it, it goes into generated stuff, you take them there, you say, oh, that's my query result, it's type, it has this type, it has those variables, etc., and you use it, and you end up with something that has type again. So in TypeScript, it's same with Flow. So now it knows that subreddit is of type get subreddit or no or something. And so if you look at those types, they're really, really ugly. And not just ugly, but if you look at what get generated, even to stuff they do underneath is fantastic, because you just look at a graphical schema, you introspect type, and you get those type. But they all get subreddit, underscore post, get subreddit. It's like they're really long and stuff. The reason you have to do this is they have to be unique for each query. So that's the reason the query get embedded into your stuff. Okay, so that's it. So that's the normal letters TypeScript way of doing it with Apollo with hooks. So you have a hooks here, use query hooks, and it's all type, and everything's happy, etc. So that's best practices, I think, unless you're using like this amazing person there, Relay. I know nobody's using Relay. Sorry, there's no amazing person, but I am. Okay, so so that's the best practices. I think Relay had done this for longer, and it's slightly nicer tooling, but their documentation lack, and obviously the community doesn't like them, as we can see. It's a shame. Okay, so now we're gonna look at our. So what would you do if you had to do this in Reason? And I can give you the answer. You'll do nothing, because you have these amazing things called macro. Again, macro or dynamic programming can have a really bad connotations coming from Ruby and stuff, where people get too crazy about generating codes, and then it gets really hard to know what's happening. But if you have kind of, it's a poor term to call them macro, but if you have something that write type for you, and you don't have to do anything, and they're all types, so according to compiler, it's code you have it's code that exists somewhere, but you don't have to write. So that's fantastic. And so you just declare your query. Same as this, you don't need any code editor extension. It's just plug into the Reason language server. It does the same things. It knows exactly that this query doesn't exist, etc. Okay, and then you can use it. I'm using this really nice tiny little library called GraphQL hooks. I just wrote bindings for it. I'll show you how to write bindings later on from Reason. So it's just similar. You have a use query. And so what this does, not only it gives you types, so you can see, same as here, you can see that everything's types. And if I change these types here, say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a method IDs on this stuff. Okay, so you just go back and say, hey, everything's good now. So you get the same Apollo experience without using Apollo. And so the greatest thing is, I mean, it's really hard enough to, and Apollo had to do this for their own libraries, that you have to do code gen that go look at file and introspect things. And for example, let's say I've got a better idea. I want to write this really nice little GraphQL query. Hooks, use hooks with a query, etc. And now I won't have types for it. And I want to type everything. And then suddenly I will have to create my own code gen, etc. And it's really, really painful. And so with this, instead, what I had to do nothing. So I just had to tell that this is a query and that generate code. So now if we go look at my, how am I going with time, by the way? Good? Yeah. So if we look at my query, use query here, we're just going to go into there. So that's how you write a binding. So it's literally take this npm package called GraphQL hook, call it, and it's like import dash, in bracket, use query, etc. And then I pass this query, this object is my ppx, and this object has many functions to it. So it has variable, same as before. It has a query, so it just turned the actual GraphQL query into a string, so I can push put to my use query. And as well, I get a parser that turns my JSON into an actual valid object and actually valid stuff, and it'll do validation as well. And all this is free, so anyone can go right now, create a new cool GraphQL library, and we'll have type for free. So you just import this new GraphQL PPX package, you add it to your project, and suddenly you have everything is typed. You have some little things to learn sometimes, but it's so convenient that every single GraphQL library out there, and they're planning, they all use this, and they all use the same common way to generate code. And again, the code doesn't have to be unique. It's all based on the query, etc. It's super convenient to use. Okay, so let's move on. So now you know why there's these 3 reasons, and I spent so much time trying to understand what is this tweet. So we spent so much time looking at YouTube. I've asked all my coworkers, what is TypeScript, what is Reason? My deduction is like TypeScript Tomato is the boring person, and ReasonML is like this cool funny guy. It's what it sounds like watching the video, but it's so meta I still don't get it. But I just love it. I spent so much time on it, thank you. I couldn't concentrate on my slides. Okay, and I just want to say thank you. You made my day. Okay, so not that we know why I like Reason and why perhaps you should be inspired by or start using Reason or not. Let's just do a tiny little demo. How long do we have? Do we have 10 minutes? Yeah, that's fantastic. So I've created a small app, and it's either Hacker News or something else. So mine is very original. I didn't do Hacker News, I did Reddit. Okay. So the best work I've ever done. It's really fast as well. It's running on the cloud. And so it has a tiny little GraphQL server on that runs and go fetch a Reddit, and then I just use this stuff. You've seen the code. I just use this to render a list of things. So it's the most boring things, but I love those boring little demo. You know, have you ever spent so much time creating those little demo and then you realize it's useless? I love doing this. Okay. Especially setting up all the boilerplate. You linter, use everything, it's really good. Okay, but if you do Reason, you don't have to. That's really good. Okay, so now we're gonna check out this guy. So I'm gonna show you the same app. Okay, so git, oh no, it's the wrong one. GraphQL, git checkout master. Okay, so it's the same app, okay, that we had before, and as well as using GraphQL hooks. And if we go look at the index.ts, you can see it's just a normal React app. It's using these GraphQL queries, using use query, typing stuff like monkey patch, etc. But it does the work. Everything is still typed. And oh no, it's not. I don't know why. Oh, yeah, but it's just like what you would do if you were doing TypeScript, unless you're TypeScript Jesus. But I don't know how to do it better. But yeah, so you have this little app, and now what I want to show you is that I've created some small components. Okay, so let's go into components. By the way, that's the Next.js app. I love the Next.js now. It's really, really nice to use. So we have this little component. So we have 2 components called header and using CSS module. Thanks, Mark. And active. It's like 2 small React components. They're fully typed, etc. And I'm just going to show you how to quickly convert them to Reason and why it's quite interesting. So the first thing I want to show you is I already have tests for it. So I already have tests for those components. They're all type tests in TypeScript, etc. You can see they're all working. So what I want to show you is that I'm going to take those 2 components, replace them with ReasonML. I won't change the test, nothing. And I just show you that it's still working. So we're going to go look at these 2 guys here. Oh no, not the test, sorry. Sorry, it's starting really bad. Okay, So first of all, we're gonna get to run the test. Okay. So we know we have some tests. Okay. So we have those tests. So now we're gonna replace those components. They are TypeScript component. Prevalent finder. Okay. We're gonna delete those components here. These two guys. Bam. And we're gonna replace them with just some reason component. I don't have enough time to create the code, but if you look at what they do, it is just exactly the same code, or very similar. It's actually a bit more better, but it's exactly the same code. Okay, so you save, and once you save, you can see that it's generating this stuff. So it's like what buckle script is generating. Again, it's generating TypeScript based on looking at your reason code. And then you look at the active link as well, generate this stuff, and you can see, oh my god, nothing's running. Run test. Okay, so now if I'm lucky enough, nothing's gonna work. So now, obviously, because I'm replacing something that was typed with no types, okay, it's gonna say, hey, I cannot find header. I cannot find anything because this is generating new files. So those new files, they're not .javascript, they're .bs, just to make sure that you know that's coming from somewhere. So I'm gonna do .bs, okay, and .bs, oh no, header dot. So again, that's the file that is generated. I don't know why it doesn't want .bs. That's the file that is generated. We're gonna look at, again, I'm using TypeScript to check the code that is actually valid. Okay, so active link. Again, I have to find it, active link here, .bs, and is it happy now? Okay, so TypeScript should be happy now. Okay, so we can do yarn type check, yarn test, okay. And unless I'm super unlucky, oh my god, nothing's running. No, so all to test passing. So I replaced some code with some other code. Again, it's boring to look at. It's very similar. If you look at it, it's very similar, except you still use, so Reason still let you use GSX, etc. It's really similar code. It works. So I just replaced something. But then there's one problem, because this generates JavaScript, and suddenly now all my new components, they're not typed anymore. So when I looked at header, it doesn't know what it wants. So for example, or if I looked at the active link test, you know, I'm passing something in it and it's like, I don't know what it is. Okay, so by doing this, you lost the type. So if you look at this guy, oh my god, he's happy. Yeah, everything become Annie, etc. So it's not as good as what you can. But so lucky enough, when Facebook started converting their Flow code base on the Messenger team to a Reason, they wanted to have a way to keep those type information coming from Reason or coming out of Reason to have them together. So what you can do instead, you can add this, it's this project called GenType that lets you tell TypeScript, hey, here, it types TypeScript component for you based on what's in Reason. So you get the best of both worlds. So you can start writing some component in Reason now and integrate them into TypeScript, and they fully type. So if we looked at a typed one now, if you look at this, we're just going to import them here. Okay, we replace. If now we save them, you can see there's a new gen.tsx, so this generates TypeScript types for you automatically. Again, all code you don't have to write is fantastic code, unless it's bad. Okay, so now you have types, and now where we did .bs stuff, we can replace this by .gen, so it's the generated with the TypeScript types. And now if you look at this stuff, you can see now it's typed. It knows exactly what you're expecting, okay, class name, etc. The types are a little bit funny, but they still do a quite good job. So now you have everything typed. You can start doing all the stuff you want. Oh no, you shouldn't replace this one, sorry. Not needed to gen. Okay. Okay, by the way, that's how fast building Reason is. Do you want to look again? Whoa. And does linting, does formatting, does build everything. Okay, so it's really happy. So now, again, it's still the same code, and it's all typed. Okay, so now you best of best world. So you've just integrated some Reason into your code base, and you haven't lost the types. You'll get the same benefits doing this on TypeScript or Flow, or if you really don't want to do stuff, you can still write normal. As I saw you can just import the component.bs. That's just a normal JavaScript file that you can use it in your code. So that's how you integrate the things into your code base. How are we doing with the time? 1 minute? No, one more minute. So there's another thing that people get really scared of. Is like, it's really cool to write new stuff, but how do you integrate with current stuff? Like, I want to integrate with current node modules that I already have, or I want to integrate this with the component that I already have. So all this thanks to Buckle script and a really nice FFI. I don't know what FFI means, but people keep mentioning it. And so when you do this, if for example, I'm using next.js and I wanted to type my next component, and so you just go, not bindings, yes, bindings. For example, next.js, so you just start declaring what types. For example, I'm using useRouter from next, so I just say, hey, let's kill this guy here. I have to increase here so you can see I'm finished. I'm promised I'll be finished soon. So this is coming from next.router. useRouter is not super documented yet that you can have hooks in next, but you do have them somewhere. They're fantastic. And I use this in my components. So for example, in my active link, do I have active links somewhere? Yeah, active links, I use useRouter. And again, if you look at this stuff, you can still do all the cool stuff, like you can have default argument that call other code, etc. So it's very similar to what you can do with JavaScript. And what I forgot to mention is OCaml is not JavaScript people friendly, but Reason was targeted as JavaScript developers. So you cannot have ES6 3000. I think we had ES7 now, perhaps not, but you have a very similar syntax. Perhaps not 3000, but something very close. Okay, so that's how you write binding. So it's super easy. You just say, hey, use router. So you literally write JavaScript code that's like import use router from stuff. And then the crazy things about this is most of the time you look at the generated code. And for example, if you look at so for example, I wanted to use this small React library called pin input, React pin input. I wanted a pin somewhere. It's like, I'm just gonna write a small binding for it and stuff. And by the time you use the binding for it, okay, OCaml is gonna say, hey, by the way, don't worry about JavaScript stuff. Everything you told me, I can deduct when you use it. So you have no runtime costs at all to write this binding. So it's just the code cancel itself out. And that's what's really good. And same if you want to, I wanted to use this global format string to format something, and you just write a small module, external, etc., and you can do this. So it's super easy. Again, it's not, there aren't that many modules out there for you to use, but it's very convenient to create those modules yourself. And sometimes when you create this, you can make those a wrapper around a library a bit more like a shim, so you can easily change one library from other, and you can make the API a bit more, I really want to say reasonable, but something like this. Okay, that's about it for tonight. Or no, that's it. Okay, so let's look at my slides. Yeah, that was everything worked. Thank you. And no, it doesn't work now. I've lost the slide. I don't know how to go next. Whoa. Yeah, we'll talk about this later on. But I work on Homepass. We're hiring. come work with us. You're gonna do no reason. Don't be afraid. It's gonna be TypeScript. It's good. And is there any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll repeat your question. So how long did it take me to get my head around the syntax? So it's really interesting. So Reason got much more popular last year, like about a year ago, and they didn't have hooks, nothing. I mean, obviously there wasn't even hooks a year ago, and it was much more involved and difficult to use JavaScript, and Reason you had to do this wrap JavaScript for Reason, etc. And because again, Reason is a functional language, you don't have object. You kind of have, but you don't have them. So if you can use function for everything, it's fantastic. So as soon as Reason, it's called ReasonReact 07 came along, I could really wrap my head around it because it was exactly the same as using React with just pure functions. But yeah, it took me about reading books, etc. It took me like 6 months to a year, and it's frustrating because especially the community is quite small, especially in Melbourne. I was like, I'm going to create a Reason Meetup, and so probably it's going to be one person, just me there talking. So I think that's really hard. But there's a fantastic Discord channel that it's free to join, where you have a lot of people that wrote all the Reason book, etc. They have 4 books now. It's a lot. And there's this other stuff that is really useful. For example, it's called Redex. Oh my God. Yeah. It's you can go see, it's like all the packages that are published by other people. So you go look at those code and you look at what's happening. For example, you want to do CSS in Reason, not in JS. You can do this with, it's a wrapper for emotions, for example, and you can use it and you can see what they're doing, and then you can use it. But yeah, it's you cannot start reading about Reason and write Reason tomorrow. So it will take some time. And it's same like functional programming as well. It's like Reason is a functional programming. There's all this term that I have here, just in case someone will ask me a question. So there's this stuff called ADT, GADT, so ADT, advanced data type. So, JavaScript has undefined or none, or undefined or no, etc. And Reason has advanced data type that's in code. It's like a result type. You can do this in TypeScript, for example, but you have, so a null or undefined is none or something of a generic, of a string, for example. So you have all these different concepts. And then if you're really into generic programming and types FDSL, etc., you can do some really crazy stuff with GADTS. For example, something that only Haskell has, unless there's a new language now that has. So you can go super advanced and stuff. Same, if you're really scared about functional programming, you can you have the possibility to do a use reference, so it means you can mutate your state if you want. There's safety, but as well there's convenience for people coming into the Reason journey. But yeah, it does take some time. There's a couple of books that I highly recommend if you come talk to me then. Is there any? Yep. Yeah, so in order to get my transpile to work, so all you have to do is you have to include this platform called BS platform. It's buckle script. That's literally you include your platforms, okay, and then you use it. You use it same as you will use TSC for type check, etc. You use it BSB everywhere to compile your stuff. So you just bring this into your stuff, and then you have same as TS config. You have a BS config, etc., where you set what's your directory, what you want to use. I want to use ReasonReact, class name, throw a lot of error, cancel some error, and output stuff to ES6. So it's very similar to what a TypeScript will do, for example. And you can use this stuff that, I'm not sure if you see the terminal, but npx, you can spin up a new template, Reason template in no time, for example, just by using BSB init and stuff. It's going to create a report that's going to have Webpack and everything. And as well, if you want to do next.js, contributed to an example on next.js example where you can do Reason with hooks and everything. So, but there's a little bit of setup, but it's the most less painful setup I've done so far. Yep. Yeah, so I like style component, I like emotion, I really like even React Native Web, for example, alt is style in JS library that do more. And for example, I was just showing you this. So the greatest thing is that you can call something new. It's not style in JS, it's style in Reason. Sounds much better. But you can do it. But at the moment, there is no wrapper for a style component, but there's a wrapper for emotion 10, and you can do this. And it's slightly different because everything has to be really safe. So what the wrapper does, it generates styles for you, and then you create your component where you link a style to it. So it's slightly different. It's like you cannot dynamically generate component because it's not typed. It's not really safe then. It's definitely possible to use a style component, and you can easily write your wrapper around it. But style component would be a really, really bad one to start with because it does a lot. There's a lot of magic with Babel, etc. So I'll start with something easier. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. All right, so we've got food. It's just over on the benches there. Help yourself. And if you're looking for the soft drink, it's in the fridges on.
We've got Lightning from Salesforce, we've got Carbon from IBM, among others, and we've also got our own Seek Style Guide, which we've had for a number of years now. All of these, including Seek Style Guide, are open source, so you can go check them out. But there's an issue here, which is that the further you invest in your design system as code, the further you distance yourself from the design environment, which still resembles this, a blank canvas where you can kind of just draw anything. All that hard work that you poured into your production-ready components are nowhere to be found in this environment. At best, you might have references to essentially mock versions of what you built, but what you built in production might have drifted from those initial mock-ups. And so your design environment, your dev environment, they're very different. So how do we how do we start feeding back into design? This has been a challenge our industry is trying to really wrestle with. I've taken a lot of inspiration from what's going on at Airbnb, and particularly with their work on React SketchUp. So if you've never seen it before, it looks something like this. The code on the left is effectively React native code, like platform agnostic code. But because it's written this way, it can render into Sketch there on the right. The challenge with this, though, is that, as I kind of alluded to just then, in order for this to work, you have to write your code in a platform agnostic way. You can't just write React for web and plug it into Sketch. Luckily, there is a more general purpose solution called HTML SketchUp, which is what we use at Seek. What's nice about this is it's a lot less constrained in terms of tech choices. Whatever's in the browser, you can snapshot it and pull it into Sketch. So it doesn't matter whether it's React or something else. If it's in a browser, you can pull it into Sketch. So we have a hidden route on our design system site, which renders out all the components in their notable states. And so we have a tool that is able to pull all these out. They're all annotated with, they're wrapped in divs with data attributes that annotate what the name of the symbol should be. So then we plug that into a CLI tool that we wrote that wraps up HTML SketchUp, and it runs Puppeteer under the hood for you. And so what you do is you point it at a URL, tell it where you want to build to, generates a bunch of JSON, and you can then pull that into Sketch via the HTML SketchUp Sketch plugin. So once you've gone through all that, this is what it looks like from a designer's perspective within Sketch. So you can see there I'm pulling in from the Seek Style Guide library a bunch of symbols in all the different states and all the different screen sizes. Here I'm building up a mobile layout. And of course, the brilliant thing about this whole setup is that everything that you're seeing in that Style Guide library is a complete mirror of what was in the code base, including what we've named things. And that's kind of the key thing, right, is getting that unified design language across design and dev. So as a designer, as I'm working with these symbols, I can go and use that same terminology with a developer, and there's not that translation layer now. If I describe a symbol that I've used here, I should see the same thing in the code base. That's what we're shooting for. So we're pushing towards this world of designing with components. With something like HTML SketchUp or React SketchUp, it's definitely a lot more on the techie side. You have to be really on the bleeding edge. But you're seeing the rise of new products that are trying to embrace this just as the default way of working, which is really, really interesting. So FramerX is the most notable example of this in the wild. They've got a lot of buzz for doing this. So Framer was an existing tool, but their new version is going all in on React. So you can see there that you're creating a design in the middle there, but it's pulling components from that pane on the left. All of those components are actually React components. You can go view source of those, edit them, create your own. They also have a store that you can publish to, pull down UI kits, that sort of thing. There's a lot of activity in this space, which is really, really interesting. There's plenty of alternatives in this space as well coming up, all taking different angles. Module Studio is another one. I could go into a lot of depth on these, but I'll just skim over them. Interplay is another one. What's great about Interplay is it's all web-based, so you don't have to spin up any special tooling locally, and it integrates with GitHub. This is one that we've actually been trialing at Seek. So you can see here I'm building a Seek UI with Interplay, but again, it's all pulling from our React component library, which is really great. What I like about these tools, again, as someone who's interested in both code and design, is that it's blurring the lines between these two disciplines. And I really, really appreciate that. But what I find interesting is if you stop and think what makes these design tools, it kind of highlights some interesting things for us to think about. So the first thing about all these a typical design tool is that they're easy to set up. New documents are cheap. Design tools are all about iterating and trying new things. And so iteration has to be really fast as well. So once you've spun up a new document, if you're working in something like Sketch, spinning up new artboards, copying and pasting work and trying new things is really quick. That's the goal of a design process. But once you start to narrow down on those ideas that are starting to resonate with you, you share them with your team or other designers at your company, work can be easily shared. That's kind of a key thing, being able to share work nice and easily. But these tools, this new era of tools that we're seeing, what I think I find is kind of challenging is that they're still working under the same assumptions. And that assumption is that code is slow. They're still working quite hard to abstract code away from you and give you this WYSIWYG style environment, which has its place. But I doubt whether this is actually as true as it was when our industry made the move towards the design workflows we have today. So in the development community, we've had similar problems and solved them in similar ways. So for example, you've got something here like JSBin, where spinning up a new environment to play around with JavaScript is as easy as opening a new tab in your browser. And even as developers who have full local development environments, we have that time where you just want to spin up a console, write some code and see what comes out. And the simplest way to do it is to open up a tool like this. There's lots of alternatives as well. RunKit's an interesting one in that it's integrated with NPM, and every single NPM package has a link straight to this RunKit page for that package. So here you can see I'm playing around with Lodash, again, without having to set anything up. Don't have to install anything. It's all ready to go. So again, as a developer, it's getting that iteration, that speed to getting started on something new really quick. Babel is another interesting example where they have the REPL on their website where you can put code on the left in ES6 or TypeScript or something like that, and it will get transpiled in the browser onto the right because it's all written in JavaScript, of course. This is how a lot of people wrap their heads around new JavaScript syntax, because you can see that easy mapping between how you would write it in the new syntax and what you might have written it in if you weren't using Babel. TypeScript does the same thing in terms of trying to onboard people into TypeScript and soften that blow. This is a nice, easy way to get started with TypeScript and start to get familiar with it. CodePen is another interesting example where they take it a bit further, where it's a lot more visual. They've got the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript panes there by default, and lots of they've got support for things like Sass. But what's also interesting is the fact that you can easily share your work with others. There's a whole community on the CodePen site where you can share your work with others. So that's particularly valuable in a more design-oriented visual environment where people are trying really creative things. When you go to the extreme of this, and we actually saw this in the previous talk, it was Code Sandbox. Code Sandbox is amazing because it takes this to the nth degree, where you've essentially got the full development environment in your browser. You've got the file browser on the left. You can create new files. You can install packages from NPM by editing the package JSON, and you get that preview pane there as well. And of course, all this is shareable because it's all web-based. Now, if you look at that list of attributes of design tools that I raised before, you'll see that all these development tools are following that same philosophy, where it's easy to set them up, to create new documents, to iterate on them, and to share them with others, because it's all web-based, of course. So how does this play into the challenges we're facing in the world of design systems? I think we have a lot to learn from design tools as developers. I think that the big advantage we have in the React space is JSX, and the fact that we can declaratively build up UI in a language that we define. The challenge that I found, though, is that as I started to build up this component library and it was locked away from the more traditional design tools, I found myself wanting to make our component code more approachable, either to developers who weren't as familiar with the design, with our design system, or even with non-technical people and designers to try and wrap their heads around how the system works. Setting up a local development environment was way too big of an ask for anyone who wasn't technical particularly. So, long story short, it led to the development of a tool at Seek called Playroom. And rather than explain it, I'm going to give you a quick demo. So this is the style guide website that you saw before. And it's your traditional website where you can browse around and have a look at the different components and so on in the different states. But you can see here we have a link under Tools to Playroom. So this opens up a new tab. This is on GitHub Pages. So it's just loading in at the moment there. So what I've got at the bottom is a code pane, and at the top is a bunch of iframes at different sizes. And what's neat is I can actually start writing JSX at the bottom. The key thing being I don't write React code. I don't have to think about writing a component or anything like that. I'm just writing the raw JSX. As React developers, you can think of it as basically just writing the return value of a render function, but wrapped in a fragment. So you don't even have to worry about having multiple elements here. So, for example, I can start to put in here I might zoom in a bit for you. Let's try that again. So I'm going to add a header to the page. And as easy as that, I've got the Seek header across 320, 740, 1024 pixel sizes. And of course, it's interactive. Now, at the moment, it's kind of in this pending state. I haven't given it a lot of props. I've got a prop auto-completion here, so I can say that I want my authentication status to be authenticated, and I want my username to be Mark. And so now I'm signed in as myself, And when I open this, you'll see that this is what it would look like if I was signed into Seek. Now again, I mentioned the fact that it's behind the scenes it's wrapped in a fragment, so I can go ahead and start adding other JSX nodes here. So I can add equally add a footer. And so I've got the top and bottom of a traditional candidate-facing Seek page. So inside of this, I can now start to flesh out a page. So what I'm going to do is a bit of a hello world of UI, which is, to me, a good example of that is like a sign-in form. So I'm going to add some text to the screen, and I'll say sign in. Now by default, that's quite small. I can use a hero size here. It gets quite a bit larger, especially on desktop. You can see the responsiveness really starts to come through here. And, but you'll see that text is hard up against the edges of the screen. That's because I need to manage the white space. Here we've got a section component that does that for us. I can wrap that in a section. This is all on one line at the moment. If I hit Command S, it'll format it with prettier for me if that's what I want. I can start to flesh out this form a bit more. What I'm going to do is going to add a card. And within a card, I'm going to add a section, again, to manage that white space. And I'm going to add a text field. And I hit Command S, it formats that again for me. Now that text field's going to need some props. We'll give it a label of email address. There we go. And let's duplicate that, and we'll add a password. Now, of course, these are all live components, which means I can start typing in them. As I update this code, it will re-render these as the code changes, which means that if I do something like this, if I add a type of password, make the password field actually hide my password, you'll see that it maintained the state that was in the fields and just re-rendered with those new props. Again, across all screen sizes. So what I'm going to do is add a button group. I'll just finish this up. And inside of that, I'm going to add a button with a color of pink. And we'll say submit. And I'll add one more, which is a cancel button. And rather than having two pink buttons, we'll have a transparent button as well. Now, what's interesting about this is you can see already that there's kind of a design issue emerging, which is the fact that while on mobile this form looks really good, arguably, I mean it's just a sign-in form, but on desktop those fields start to go all the way out to the end of the screen. I'm gonna have to manage that layout somehow. I won't go through that exercise now, but these are the sorts of conversations you need to have as you start iterating on a design responsively. I could just hack it and say that on this card I'm going to add an inline style of, let's say, a max width of 540. And from a design system perspective, this is already calling out that are we missing something in our system? Like I shouldn't have to reach for an inline style setting a max width. These are the sorts of conversations that often get missed at the design phase. And when a developer goes to build it, they're going to be the ones that in a hurry just have to hack something in there. Ideally, what you want to do is get these discussions as close as you can to that design phase where you can iterate, change things, and even propose changes to the system before you get to that final building phase. Now, what's really cool about Playroom, and one thing that is not obvious at the moment because I'm in full screen mode, is that every time I change the code at the bottom, it was updating the URL. It's a bit small there, but there's basically all the code that's at the bottom there is base 64 encoded in the URL. So I can grab this and I can actually send this to someone. So if I send that to someone in Slack, they open it up and there you go, there's the design that I just made. And they can start to play around with it. So for example, I can imagine a designer right off the bat would say, button shouldn't say submit. It should say like, what are you actually doing? Such as sign in, and there you go, I can change that. I could make further changes, the width of the card, whatever I want to do. Let's make it a bit wider. That looks terrible, but anyway, we'll send it back and you get that live iteration in the browser and it's really easy to share your work. Cool, which tab was I on? This one. Now this tool is open source, so if you want to try it out, if you have a design system, please do, and I'd love to hear how you go with it. npm install Playroom and give it a go. Now there are two key commands, which is start and build. Start gives you your local development environment, and build builds it for production, similar to tools like Storybook, for example. Now just like all good JavaScript tools, it has its own config file, so you can configure the components. That's obviously the most important thing. So that's pointing to a file that exports all the components that are available in the scope of that JSX pane. If you have a theming system, you can export a set of themes as well. If you need to provide any context to the frames, There's a frame component as well, particularly important if you've got a theming system and you need to actually wire the theme in at the root node. You can configure the widths that you saw. You can configure the example code if you rather than having it blank, you can have something to start people off. But importantly, if you've got anything custom going on with Webpack, this tool's built on top of Webpack, so you can provide your own config there as well. Now, I mentioned there in the config themes, and that's something that's I really want to drill into further because that's something that we've made a lot of usage of at Seek, and it really starts to show the value of a tool like this over traditional design approaches. So I talked about Seek's style guide, but at Seek we're actually working on a new design system called Braid. And the reason for that is, you may not be aware of this, I didn't know until I worked at Seek actually, but Seek is actually the Seek group of companies, and they own companies all over the world, different brands that already have their own brand identities. And what we're trying to do is be able to build UI that can be shared across those different regions. And in order to do that, we need a design system that's able to be skinned for those different regions. So this is what Braid looks like. This is the website for it. It's very much your traditional component library. The difference being there's themes here for each component. You can see what it looks like for the different brands. And here's Playroom for Braid. So you can see now the difference between the themes is a lot more pronounced. It's not just the colors, it's also the whole grid system, the typography, everything is kind of up for grabs here. And so having a tool like this where you can actually see those pronounced differences as you develop is really critical. And traditional design tools really struggle with this sort of thing. Like you can imagine if I open up something like Sketch and I try to do this manually, the odds of me getting it close to what it will look like across all these different brands with all the minutiae of the different rules, it's pretty tough. And this ends up actually being an easier way to do it. So it's really proved its worth in this domain for us. As developers though, what I think is really interesting is how it's augmented our workflow in terms of how we code on this project. So the first thing I want to highlight about our development workflow is how it's actually become something that we run locally in development quite a lot. So if I'm working on a new component, Storybook is useful, and we'd make use of that as well. But one thing that sort of component explorer doesn't give you is that freedom to play around and see how that component composes with other components, and how easily you can try new things and iterate and move things around. And that's what this environment gives us. But at the same time, it means that we can see what it looks like across all the themes simultaneously. So this is on a single screen trying to simulate what a development environment might look like. Typically that code, of course, would be on another monitor or something like that. So as you iterate on the code of the design system itself, you'll see the UI updating. And then if you want to start playing around with the components as you're changing them, you'll edit the code at the bottom of that playroom there. And it gives you that nice feedback loop of, is it looking the way I expect, and does it behave well within a set of components? Because that's ultimately what we're shipping here. The other thing that I found really, really interesting is how it's altered our pull request workflow. So we're really big on pull requests, and a big part of that is having status checks for them. One of the things we do, though, is we deploy a preview site for every build. So you get a full copy of the Braid website. You can go and have a look at any proposed changes. But importantly, the Playroom comes along with it, since it's part of the website. So for any given pull request, I can go in and actually start to play around with the proposed changes to the design system, simulating what an end user might experience having these new components. And what's funny is that as a developer, I can pull down this code locally and spin it up, but it's way more efficient now for me to just open it in the browser and not have to go through any of those steps. So in this example of a pull request, what's really neat too is because you can link to it, they've made a pre-canned example of what this component looks like in a real form and offered up a Playroom link for me to give it a try. And you can see here I'm free to edit it, play around with it, see what I think. Even find bugs. That's something that's also been a nice surprise with this tool, is that often with things like Storybook, we can, and I'm as guilty as anyone, you can fall into the trap of all these happy paths where, lots of short text and things like that. This is a great way to be like, well, what does it look like if I throw awful junk data at this thing? Does it still hold up? And it's definitely found lots of issues for us, so that's really cool. What this has introduced for us is this new sandbox for our design language, something that sits alongside the documentation and evolves with it with every single pull request, and something that we can present to non-technical people as well to try out, which we've definitely seen has happened. Now, one thing I want to stress is that this doesn't eliminate traditional design tools. I'm a big believer in using the right tool for the job. Unfortunately, I do think our industry hangs on to tools that are really for that early mock-up phase. We hang on to them way too long in the design phase. And I think there's a lot of room for tools like this to start to come in and give a design experience that's a bit closer to that final medium. What I think it does, though, is it reframes their purpose. What are these traditional tools good at, and what should they be solving, and what should these new tools take on? Now, UX designers are big on wireframing, and I really think they're onto something in the world of design systems. I think it's a natural fit, where if what you're trying to do is design pages and workflows, this is the realm in which you want to operate. You don't want to get into that nitty-gritty detail. If that is what you want to do, you operate at this level, which is defining your palette. This is what you draw from when you want to flesh out those wireframes into something more final. So that means practically that low fidelity iteration should be on paper, or something that is paper-like, something very loose and free. But the closer you get to production, that high fidelity design iteration should be in code. And I think the tooling is trying to catch up to this. We're not quite there yet, but people on the bleeding edge are realizing that this is where we need to go. So we're seeing the rise of code-powered design tools like FramerX. What I'm really interested in is the flip side, which is design-powered development tools. A lot of code tools were actually like this years and years, decades ago, and it's like we're only now just getting back to it. Dan Abramov was tweeting the other day about how Visual Basic was his entry into coding, and we're starting to see that push back towards that model a little bit. But we've still got a lot of road ahead of us to really deliver on that promise. So I want to end by stressing again that if you're working in the space, if you've got a component library, a design system, this tool is definitely made for you. So please do try it out and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you, and any ideas you have to make it better would be fantastic. That's it for me tonight. Thank you so much. Yes.
In your example, it requires a playroom frame component.js. Who will get that?
So the question was, in my example, there was a playroom frame component. That's a component you have to write yourself. I might quickly, let's see if I can show you an example of what that looks like. So for example, in Braid, I've already got it open. Because Braid is a themed design system, in particular, that's required. Let's see if I can zoom this in a bit for you. So if I go into lib playroom, there's a frame component here. And so the job of the frame component is it gets past the theme. So I've configured my themes. So and that means that each frame will get rendered with one of those themes. And that comes in as a prop to the frame component. So here you can see I'm using my theme provider, and I'm passing in that theme. If I was to console log that theme, that's whatever I configured in my theme export. So I can show you what the theme file looks like. Let's see, themes. Index. Yeah, so this is my themes file. It's just exporting all of those. If I drill into those, you'll see that it's an object with a name, some tokens, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Yep.
So if I think about the way I'm writing React, quite often I'm not just passing in like plain props or like a string prop. I'm passing a function or like a string prop or something like that. And I imagine that's not the kind of detail which is going into the playroom. So how have you guys done it? Like, do you have sort of like different kind of components, or how do you deal with not actually writing code in the playroom?
Sorry, I was going to summarize that, but it's quite a long question. I'll try and bring your question into my answer a little bit. So the first question was around how complex can the JSX be? Like, you can have primitive values like strings and that sort of thing. You're totally unconstrained there. I mean, if you want to write functions here, that it'll work. It's just a question of how ergonomic is it, really? I guess, is this the right place for it? To me, this is most useful for more of your static design, more so than building interactive prototypes, although you totally could. I think that what we find is that you kind of build these things in layers, where you've got your a component library which is purely about your design language. So it's trying to capture the way a designer would think about your brand, and it's less about that sort of behavior. And then you have so we have private component libraries that are more domain specific that build on top of this, if that makes sense. So those are kind of the different layers.
So is there a follow-up, which is, can you constrain which components you expose to Playroom? So not be confused?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, the question was like, can you constrain what's here? One of the decisions I made early on with this tool, because I was obviously looking for references of similar tooling like this out in the market, how they manage this sort of thing. Other tools, what they often do is they'll let you put in like a glob of like find all components in my project. And I actually don't like that, because I feel like what you lose then is the sense of public and private components. So what I've done instead is I've made it that you just point me at a file, and whatever you export, that's what's exposed. And I think that works well with component libraries, because you tend to have that file anyway. So for example, in Braid, if I go into, where are we? So if I go into lib components and then index.ts, like this is the main entry point to this library anyway for consumers, and it doubles as the file that exposes everything to Playroom. So it won't pick up any private components that aren't really considered part of the public API at all. All right, I'll do maybe one more. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, the autocomplete is, there's two versions of the autocomplete, depending on whether your project is JavaScript or TypeScript. If it's JavaScript, it knows the names of the components just by the names of the exports, but it also uses React.gen to get the prop types. But if you've got TypeScript, it also uses React.gen TypeScript instead, and so it'll pull in the, so in the case of Braid, I'll give you a live example of this. Here we go, Playroom. So these types are driven off our TypeScript definition. So if I do something like alert here, tone equals info critical positive, these are defined in TypeScript, and it's being picked up automatically. Yeah, like that's sort of by design, because I guess other tools that are more general purpose in terms like Code Sandbox, for example, you would have to import sort of component by component what you want, and that's not really what, in a design context, you really don't want to do that. You just want it all to be there, yeah. Yeah. I'll do one more, one more, yep. Yeah, so the question is like how much has Playroom influenced how we build our components themselves, or like, so the big thing for me that I've found really interesting, Playroom has, I mean, I was already thinking this way, it's why I built Playroom, but it's reinforced and pushed me further in this direction, which is really trying to make sure that everything is exposed as components and that everything's composable, but I can get from zero to a polished design as fast as possible. I think that's often what can get missed in design systems, and I say this as someone who's guilty of it. You know, the faster I can get to a finished design without having to wrap things in all these abstract components, the better the design system looks, but also the easier it is to build with. So for example, you saw in the Seek Style Guide example, I had to wrap everything in sections all the time, and it was really awkward. It made sense like logically when we wrote the components, we're trying to separate our concerns and everything, but it turned out in practice, I have to use this component, pretty much every time I use a card, I have to use a section, and it's annoying. So with Braid, we made sure that when I put a card on the screen and I add some text, and I say hello world, the white space is included, since that's like the 90% plus case, that sort of thing. So really optimizing for speed of iteration and that sort of thing. All right, that's it for me again, so thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Next up, we've got Baz. He's going to tell us a little bit about Cypress and documentation and React. Give it up for Baz.
I was going to say grab a beer, but you're fast, man.
Sorry.
Grab a beer. Well, that shows up. Yeah, that showed up. Now come back to your seat fast. Run. Oh, slides are up. All right. I will wait for a few seconds. All right, let's go. Hi, I'm Bas. This talk is going to be about documenting your end-to-end tests with Cypress. I work at Australia Post, front-end practice series, already mentioned that. I'm Microsoft MVP, written a few books, do a lot of Egghead courses, do a bunch of Stack Overflow, and you can find the accompanying code for this later in the when I upload the slides on the Meetup group. All right. The key takeaway from this presentation is going to be test behavior, not implementation. And this lesson is not new. Like when they were refactoring the React code base in for Fiber, there was a lot of tests that were testing the internals of React that weren't going to impact anybody who's using React, but they had to refactor those tests. As you're writing tests, try and focus on why you're writing tests. Tests serve a purpose, and one of the purposes can be to document how your application behaves, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. Now, if you're going to write a test that tests how your application is going to behave, there are going to be a few actors that are going to be interacting with your application. There's going to be, of course, the user, and then there's the backend communication, and then there's the operating system like timers or something like that that your system is going to be interacting with. There are lots of solutions for this, but the solution that I'm going to be showing today is Cypress, and the reason is flake resistance. If you've written stuff like this, where you put before eaches because you couldn't sequence your code properly, thrown in bunch of its, because how many people here have done karma testing or protractor testing? Cool, very few. Yay, React Meetup. You don't have to do that. You just use Cypress. Junk. All right, let's jump into the Cypress concepts and do a demo. That was not a part of the script. All right. So the way Cypress works is it's a simple NPM package. You bring it in as an NPM install, of course, using the good name Cypress. And because I'm going to be using TypeScript in this demo, you also bring in TypeScript, Webpack, and TS Loader, and then you tell Cypress to use the two. And the way you tell Cypress to use TypeScript and Webpack, you just go to your support file. Sorry, plugins. Go to your plugins and just copy paste it. It's in the Cypress guide. Now at this point, you have essentially completely set up Cypress. This folder that contains this package.json and the npm install of that, that's all you need. You can use this particular folder and start writing tests to test something that is completely not related to React. For example, I can jump into my integration tests, and let's test everybody's favorite website. Ah, no internet. Okay. Let's just go ahead and visit localhost. Cool. Now, if I show you my package.json once more, I have a few scripts over here. There is start, which is going to run Cypress open, and there's build, which is going to run Cypress run. I already have start running in my terminal over here. And what that does is it opens up the Cypress testing tool. And this is what that looks like. And if you run a particular test, it's going to go ahead and carry out the actions that exist within the test. All that we have right now is visit localhost 8080. The Cypress testing tool also has this inspector over here that allows you to get, can you see back there? No, you really can't, can you? All right, let me just go to arrangement. Not storage management. Scaled, not good. All right, I don't see an option for changing the, oh, there it is. Let's go, that's better. All right. Wow. So you can see that this playground selector allows you to select something. For example, I'm going to go ahead and select this. And what you have over here, I'll just clear that I didn't like that error just showing up randomly. You have the full Chrome dev tools available within the Cypress playground. But with the selector, it also helps you write good commands. This resolution is really not working, so I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to go to 1080. It generated this thing, sci.get. I'll just put it over here, and you can see it better over here. So you can get something from the screen, and then let's just go ahead and type something over here. Let's just type in hello world, whatever. But one thing that you'll notice interestingly over here is that hello world doesn't just show up as a value injection. It's going to interact with the application like a user would interact with the application. It's going to go keystroke by keystroke and enter that in. Another thing that it's going to do is that if you were to use these things, these sci.get and sci.type, they are called commands. There is one command called should, which exists for assertions. So let's just go ahead and get that input again and assert that it should have the value. Let's just do h. I was wondering why I wasn't getting autocomplete, because it wasn't correct. All right, get the new to-do input, and it should have the value h. At this point, you will see that Cypress is going to go ahead and retry till that assertion becomes correct. In this case, nothing ever sets it to h, so the test fails. Of course, I can go ahead and hack in and type in h myself, and that'll make the test pass. And now this wizardry that's happening with automatic retries and all the things is because Cypress has command execution separation. So if I go ahead and log out console log before and then log out end, you will see on the console that both before and end log out before the test even starts running. So test is still running, but those things have logged out, and now the test failed. That is because what you're doing over here is not actually running the test. You're giving Cypress the commands to go ahead and run the test at a later point. That allows it to introduce fake flake resistance as well as retries, and one more thing that, yeah, that's good enough. All right. Let's start testing our application for real. Now, before I start writing tests for the to-do app, there's one thing that I really want to stress over here is to-do MVC comes with this spec. This is not, if I actually go into the spec, zoom in, you can see that it mentions things like clicking a checkbox marks it as complete by updating some class names and adding something to the li. Something happens to the label. Hovering over to do shows some class name. And the editing item spec is just a paragraph that probably contains a lot of behaviors that you need to test. So the first step to actually writing tests that document your application is to write a spec that actually mentions behaviors instead of implementation details. So this is sort of an attempt at that. Like an item starts off as unchecked. Clicking a checkbox toggles it to do in between active and complete. Clicking the remove button should remove the item. And there's a bunch of spec for the edit item as well. Now, if I go back to the test, how many people here are familiar with the concept of page objects? All right. How many people here actually do end-to-end testing? Well, that explains it. The few people that do end-to-end application testing are the ones that are familiar with page objects. So page objects exists to make your test's interaction with the application as solid and less brittle as possible. For example, if your test is going to interact with the to-do MVC app that we have up over here, I'm going to add a few class names that I'm going to be testing against. I'm going to add selectors so that I can interact with the elements. Selectors are just going to return CSS selectors over here. And then I have a few actions like visit, add a to-do, and get all to-dos. Now, you might have noticed that while we are testing the app using Cypress, it doesn't start off in a clean state. It starts off with whatever the test was last left, the application was last left in. And it's because it's interacting with the backend. And you can actually see in the Cypress test runner the XHR requests that it is making. You can actually even see over here when you hover over an XHR what the application looked like before and after that XHR completed. Now, Cypress actually allows you to mock out the backend if you want to. For example, I can jump in and say, dear Cypress, start a server and add a route that whenever somebody asks for from the API, which is running on 3000, get all, just return this mocked out object which contains an empty array. And now, if we jump back to our Cypress test, it starts off in a decent state, but the backend is still not in the correct state. So when you start to mutate stuff, send out more commands, for example, if I go ahead and click over here, you can see the XHRs being logged in the test runner as well. You'd have to start mocking these out as well. And a lot of people do this. They build a complete backend again for their end-to-end tests. You don't need to do that. What you can do is, instead of mocking stuff out, reinitialize the backend. Just like you reinitialize the front end, initialize your backend for the testing sake. So for example, instead of creating this route, I can go ahead and make a request. And now there's something special about this request, that the Cypress is going to make the request on behalf of the user. So if this particular request from localhost 3000/API set all was going to return some cookies or something like that, they would actually go into the browser. So if you, for example, you're doing a login system testing, the login is going to work naturally, because it's not a request like, oh, I opened up a terminal and reset the backend. The request is actually being made from the browser as if the user was making that request. So now that I've initialized the backend between each test, I can verify that over here as well. The backend is initialized. I can move this stuff like visit and request into before each over here. How many people here are familiar with Mocha? Okay, so how many people here are familiar with Jest testing? Cool. So how many people are familiar with Mocha testing? Because a person looked like, okay, really no one here uses Mocha. It used to be a thing before Jest was a thing. These tests are just Mocha tests. So Cypress is not inventing new concepts here. And I actually have something over here for each of my tests. Let's just write one. New to do. The start server, just that function you saw, which reinitializes it. Page visit is on my page object, which just goes ahead and visits this particular page. This spec that you're seeing over here, that's just a bunch of behaviors. How do you convert them into executable tests? You put them into the heading and the describe and the tests and the its. That's just as simple gets. What is the requirement of the spec? The input element should be focused when the page is loaded. Well, dear Cypress, when I'm loaded, visit is automatically in my before each, we just saw that. As soon as the page loads, the focused should have the class from my page selectors, or class names actually, the new to do input. How a to do is created? Created by enter, adding it to the list. All right. Let's just go ahead and get the to do input. Again, I have my selectors. And you type in something. Let's just type in hello React Melb. Created by enter. All right. How do I type in enter? You send in a special command sequence. Now, this command sequence, if you actually wanted to just write a bracket, you use the command sequence for that. So you're not blocked in from actually writing a bracket, in case you're wondering, but I just want to send the enter sequence, so that I'm sending that through the type command. All of this is actually in the documentation for type, and because the type function, and because I'm using TypeScript, I actually get internal sense and all that, and you can actually click on that and read the docs yourself if you want to. Now go ahead, get that input, type in some stuff, type in the enter key, and it should get added to the list. So if I go ahead and get from my selectors the label by index 0, it should have the text, what we typed in, which is hello React Melb. Escape. Yep. Clear the input after adding. Well, let's just go ahead and type that stuff again. Type in and enter, and then the input should have the value of nothing. Easy. Should trim before adding. All right, let's just go and add something that has spaces towards the end. But the label should get it without the space. Do not create a to-do if the result is an empty. Well, let's just go ahead and add something that is just a bunch of spaces. I'll just type an enter here. Then the label should not exist. These sequences that I'm typing over here, the strings not exist. They are assertions, and Cypress comes with chai as well as chai jQuery. So not exist, have text, have value. These are things that exist in chai jQuery, and Cypress puts them in as well. And the reason why they have it as a string, according to the documentation, is because it helps with the command execution nature that I showed previously, which gives you flake resistance and automatic retries. And let's just go ahead and run that. New to do. Cool. I could, of course, do the same thing for all the other spec items as well, but this is the last talk, and I think everybody would like to go home. Questions? So, Ali. Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Use it basic just as a document, or what do I do if I need cross-browser testing as well?
Yeah. So like I said, I didn't sell it as a cross-browser testing tool. I sold it as a documentation tool. If someone comes up to you and says, "What happens when you enter something that has a space in it?" you can just show this. Now, in this particular case, it's not a particularly complex example, but when you have something like this, it helps you document what the user is going to see. That's the objective. The objective is not to make sure that it works in all the browsers. Cypress will eventually support all browsers, but that's not the main focus. It's to give some testing. And the first portion of your question was, if I don't have time to document, write the test. So this is definitely, like you saw me write this over here, this is so much faster than if you have used anything else, which not many people have in this room for some reason. It's much faster than that. If you've heard it's slow, something else is slow, this is not that thing, this is faster. Did you think I was slow today? Cool, next question. And yep. What? What's flake resistance? So flake resistance is a term that testers use quite commonly, and I had a nice little image over here of a special snowflake, because you don't want your tests to be special snowflakes. Flake is brittleness, tests that randomly pass. If you've ever done end-to-end testing, example of that is this simple test that we wrote in our example, that go ahead and visit this, and then get the to-do, and then type in something. Let's just do that. Cool. If I go to my tests right now, Do you think I've written something that could have flake? It could have flake if this particular to-do takes a while to show. So you see Cypress actively retrying for the visit to complete, because websites take a while to load. And then this get, it would actually try for a few minutes as well. Like if I go ahead and make this get a bit invalid, what you'd get in most other testing frameworks at this point would be an immediate error that type is not a function of undefined. Whereas in Cypress, what you're getting is, I'm going to retry that get. I'm going to wait, maybe it shows up for 4 seconds. It's the default timeout. And then if it doesn't show up, it errors at that point. And you get a lot better autocomplete of, okay, the get failed. It's not that you couldn't type something, the get failed. Flake resistance, yay. Next. Go for it. Yeah, so how does it work with class components, dynamically generated stuff? So if you notice over here, don't use class names for testing. This is an example that has everything in there. If you use class names, it contains that. But if I jump to my to-do page, what I also have over here are data-selectors. If I jump back to my playground, add some stuff, you see at the bottom a few links that filter between, let me just stop that. So that filter between all active completed items. These things, if I ask Cypress to generate the selector for me, you can see that it actually notices that it has a data dash attribute. If you're curious about what a data dash attribute is, what I mean there is that it is literally a DOM attribute of something that starts with data dash, go, data dash. And I'm using the test. Cypress actually actively recommends using test or test ID as the name for test selectors. And if you have a data dash attribute, Cypress Playground will actually generate this get with a particular selector for you as well. And if I actually want to click that, for example, I could jump in here and paste that in and click it. So for class names, you don't need to do that. You don't need to use class names. You can add custom attributes. Now, one more thing that I will mention is, since you've asked, I actually made it intentionally completely framework agnostic. I'm not actually using anything from my application within the test right now, but other than this page object. But you can actually start importing your application from whatever framework it's written in. So I can go ahead and import from up there, from up there, from up there, from up there, go to my web app, go to my source, go to my UI folder, go to my whatever I copied from to-do MVC, which was just the CSS, and bring in the class names or whatever other things it exports. I just bring in the CSS, so class names, I'll just call them as foo, and then instead of writing this magic string that is loosely coupled between the test and the app, I could do foo dot new to do, and the test would still work. Question? Yep. So the number of retries are not, but the timeout is. The reason why the number of retries, there's no, it'll retry as much as time permits. You normally, if you take any other framework as well, you normally have a timeout for the full test. And this is another thing that's actually good about Cypress, is that in other frameworks, you normally have a set timeout for this particular test somewhere over here. And then you have to do the math that I have 5 operations, each of them might take 4 seconds, so 4 times 20 is what I'm gonna send it. And then when someone else adds one more thing, you're like, okay, should I update the timeout as well? But in Cypress, you don't have to do that. So the get command, if you want an additional timeout over here, you set that using options to get. Any other questions? Yep. Yep. So the question is, it's doing web application testing, like I'm doing DOM testing, so get something, blah, blah. Can I use it for API testing as well? So let's just do that. Yes, you can. What you do is side.request, something you've seen me do a request in the server. If I just go to my server file, from here you can actually go ahead and when you get the response, you can do response dot body dot whatever should have. Cool. Yep. Can you run Cypress headless? Good question. One more thing I'd mention on that is it actually does cores for you as well. So because it's actually using a browser to do the test, the request goes as a browser. So if you don't have cores, so better than running terminal tests. So does it run headless as well? Yes, it does. Let's run it headless. So you saw in my package.json over here, before I actually go ahead and run it headless, you saw me write this test. I'll just make sure that this is the only thing that runs. Sorry, only, not scared. Now, if you saw in my package.json over here, for this E2E test, I have Cypress run as a build. So if I go ahead and kill the runner, because the runner's done running and he needs a break, npm run build, which is just going to run Cypress run, it'll actually run the tests headless, and that's what we do in our CI environment, and it'll also take a video recording of the test. And we have build assets, a folder build assets within our Bamboo. We use Bamboo at Australia Post. And it'll put the video over there. And you should see a video getting generated pretty soon for the test that you saw over there. The video for that is out. I'll just open that up anyways. It puts them in the... Oh, a test failed. Example, yes, interesting. Nonetheless, I left example in a bad state because I was doing the other test. But this edit item, if I reveal in Finder and run this right now, this is a video recording of, not edit item, clearly, item, wasn't this? New to do. Which one did we test? has to be new to do. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. What did I kill? I killed the presentation. That's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anybody have a poem that ends at 4? I thought it'd be done by now. All right, next question while that gets done. Alex. Oh, yeah. Yes, so don't use WebDriver is what you're saying, mass. Wait for, so yeah, so you're talking about detect changes or? Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, cool. Yeah, sorry, excellent. Yeah, so you don't need to do in the Selenium API. You need to do a call for wait for element and to remove that brittleness of trying to type to something that doesn't exist on the screen right now. You use wait for, but in Cypress you don't need it because when you do a get, it'll automatically wait for the element to exist. So that's completed, and. Yeah, okay, interesting. But yeah, that's a video recording of what you saw me do previously as well. It's really useful if something were to fail. So let's just make something fail by saying blah, blah, blah. And we'll run that again and take the next question. Yes, Bryce? Yeah, I totally planned this before. Like I gave questions to a few people that I knew the names of. Can I just talk about open source? Yeah. So Yep, so the question is, the Cypress also comes with a dashboard service. If you want that dashboard service, you have to pay for it. Do we use it? Do we see any value in it? Of course, I see value in it, but do I use it, or do I think I personally need it for my use case? No, because when something goes wrong, we get this nice video that shows us, for example, wow, did I not? Okay. Which test am I missing, making Bash new to do? Yes, it does. Yes, it very much does. So you can see that particular assertion, that test that I struggled to find, the dashboard would have told me that in your test, this failed, so look at that particular video, just click on that. Don't stumble through your Finder. All right, next question, if there's time for it as well. Yeah. Oh man, go for it.
How do you use this for macro services? Like, do you have to bring up all the services and then test them?
Yeah, so when you have a lot of backends, because you saw me initialize one backend over there, do you bring all of them up on your dev machine or on a dev environment? Yeah, so okay, so I'll tell you how we do it. So our microservices are AWS Lambda. You cannot run a Lambda on your machine. It goes to the dev environment. So on our CI, it points to the dev environment, and that's what it talks to. And all of them are up on Lambda always. Now, if you're running some other microservice architecture where you have to bring it up, then you'd have to bring it up and then run the test. I'll remove the microservice part of it and say, if you have backend services, how do I integrate the test running after the service is up? There is a command, npm package, start server and run, which is general purpose. What that does is it runs one command, which can be a bash command or another npm command. In our case, npm start for the web app. And then you also give it a port, and it'll actually keep retrying that port and see if that port is now being listened on. So start service and run start server, port 3000 is now active, then go ahead and run the test. Cool? That's how you integrate it on the CI, a backend initialization. Any other questions? Yeah. Ooh, so do you test your production system? We do not test our production system. No, so as in, no, don't run automated tests against it. At least, yeah, I don't think we do that. It's normally smoke testing, waiting for the health checks to pass kind of thing, not maybe. But yeah, definitely not automated. It's just how we do it. Any other questions? Not a full end-to-end test anyways. Yeah, so we have embedded, yeah, so we have embedded QAs. Sorry, I should have listened to the second part of that. Yeah. So who's writing these tests, the developer or the QA person? So Cypress tests, the developers are writing them right now. Someone else previously asked me about, maybe that was you, about what do the, similar to, it doesn't support all browsers, what do I do? So the QA does use Selenium WebDriver, but if you think about your end-to-end, if in our case, our web application is not our end-to-end. You submit a form, then an email gets generated, then another team, someone replies to the email, other systems work out and whatnot. So there is Cypress involved, there's Bash involved, there's Python involved, there's insert another language at some point that was cool, Groovy involved. But that's the nature of, I don't want to do all of this myself, I'm going to write a computer to do this, and this system is all over the place. Big systems are. So in our team, Cypress is used by the developers mainly. It's a part of our project as a folder. Actually, interestingly, our QA said that I saw you guys using Cypress, and then in a separate presentation, I saw Cypress being used without being embedded in a project. So maybe I can use it as well. I'm like, yeah, you can. But in our projects, it's embedded within the code base, and it imports stuff as well. Like you saw me import the class names. Of course, I don't use class names, but yeah, the developers in our team, because it's so easy. Any other questions? So how do I test a reset password scenario? It's mostly focused on the XHR for the reset is sent from the UI. So you do, so you saw me send a request and try to test it. What I can also do is start a server. You saw me make a server and try to mock out something, and then add a route. And within the route, there's an option for on response, and then actually on request. So you set up, before you make the button that's going to call reset password, you create an on request and ensure that it contains the stuff that you thought that the request, the web application would make. And that's one of the strong points of Cypress. You do request.should, whatever. That's one of the strong points of Cypress, is that you don't need to mock out anything in your UI application, because you can mock out the environment that your application is working in perfectly. You can mock out the user, you can mock out the backend, mock out the operating system. Any other questions? Cool. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Baz. All right, so announcements. If you've got anything you'd like to say that you think is oriented with the React community, or if you're hiring, or there's a meetup you recommend, come form a line over here. We'd like to hear about it. Or a particular upcoming conference involving components.
Hello, I'm Dan. I work about 400 meters down the road at a small digital agency. We make mobile apps and websites. If you know React, CSS, React Native preferably, come see me. And if you're interested in working in a really lovely building with really warm set of developers and developers everywhere, although you're in a small team, yeah, we're hiring, so come and talk to me. Yeah, thanks.
Hello everyone, my name's Leo. I am the co-founder of Engineers AI. We are building a chatbot CMS platform, self-funded, working with some of the biggest brands in the world like NAB, Facebook, and a lot of like Victoria Police. And front end is fully React, back end is Node, and we're looking for anyone who has experience in those two to join us to, you know, make something awesome. So come talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex, I'm from Red Wolf Roche. Just want to firstly say thanks to Mark, Baz, and also Anthony for a great chat, and Jake and Kogan for having us here, so I think they all deserve a clap. Cheers. I'm working on a few different roles at the moment. I'm working with an ex-lead of Amazon in Japan, so he's got about 7 years experience there at Groupon. We're building a very high-performing team, ex like Redbubble, REA, Envato, AWS, PwC, and I'm looking for another senior front end. Remuneration's up to 170 plus super. And then another one of my startups has gone international, so I'm looking for a number of full-stack JS devs, React Node on AWS. So come and see me after if you want to have a chat or just chat about the career path and everything like that. Yep, cheers.
Hi, my name is Alex. How did you like the talks tonight? Do you want to learn more about design components, design systems, style components? Cypress? We have it all at ComponentsConf. We have the workshop that from Cypress team that actually runs the half-day workshop with and helps you to learn Cypress. We have the talk from the Cypress team. We have the talk about the design systems, design component. We have talk about React, how you can learn it actually in deeps. So we have those flyers somewhere around. Make sure you take one when you go home and give it to your colleagues and your manager and ask for the ticket to the conference. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aidan from OVO. It's ourveryown.com.au. We are consultants. We also do in-house applications. We're really looking for someone experienced in React. We also do a bit of Angular. Yeah, so I'll be around for a while, so if anyone's looking for a role, yeah, we're here. Thanks.
Great, thanks. At Kogan, we're always looking for pretty switched on people. If you think that's you, come speak to one of us or send me a message on meetup.com and I can point you in the right direction. We're also always looking for speakers of different experience levels, even juniors. It's really important to hear from everyone in the community, and I'd like to see more, especially junior talks. Apart from that, thanks for coming. Have a great night. You can stick around for a bit longer, and hopefully we'll see you next time.